Howdy, folks. Welcome back to another episode of the Texas SignalCast. I'm your host, Joe Deshotel, and I'm here with my co-host, Jessica Montoya Coggins. Hello, Jessica.
Hey, Joe.
Boy, there's a lot to talk about. It's pretty much all bad. We like to throw in some good news every now and then, but for the most part, I think what we're seeing is the GOP, especially in Texas, is pretty much just losing it completely and just scattershot all over the place. I mean, we're losing at SCOTUS, trying to overturn the ACA. Our grid can't even stay online, and Abbott's trying to build a wall with a GoFundMe. I mean, it's just really awful. So, you know,
And that was
you
just on Monday, really.
that was just Monday. Yeah, exactly. I mean, there's just so much, so much. Normally like this time of the year, I mean, this is summer. The session's over. It's not an election year. Normally, this is the quietest time in the entire cycle. The year after the presidential session is over, and that is just not the case. So, I even thought like at the end of 2020, it's like I love what the signal's doing. We're doing so much to turn out the vote and like educate people. But what are we going to do next year when there's really not much going on? So that question has been answered. So let's just kind of start from the top here. Let's start with DC. So Paxton, of course, Ann Abbott approved, led another fight at the SCOTUS to overturn the ACA, and it was ruled by the Supreme Court 7-2 that they basically had no standing whatsoever. I don't know if you read any articles about this or saw this, but that was kind of the headlines today.
It was pretty notable. So yes, this is Paxton had been leading the challenge against the Affordable Care Act, and people had sort of circled this on their calendars as a case to watch. And there were a number of ways that this could have gone. It was within the realm of possibility that 30 million Americans would have just lost health care. So that was something that was that did not occur because of the decision. And it was, I think, a little surprising for folks that Gorsuch actually sort of ruled against this. I'm not a legal person, so I can't sort of parse out anything. But yes, this is what Ken Paxton. He has, of course, launched a number of cases in the Supreme Court. The case against DACA is still up there, or it's still in South Texas. It could potentially make its way to the Supreme Court. He also infamously tried to toss out the votes of 4 states that voted for Joe Biden. So this is just another big L for him at the nation's highest court.
Yeah, I mean they're mounting up, and I saw David Weigel, who is a big commentator online, but I think he's the Washington Post, and he was musing whether or not this would make a difference because Paxton is going to have a very competitive primary. We talk about Eva Guzman, who is a current Texas Supreme Court justice running for Attorney General against Paxton, as well as George P. Bush running against Paxton. And he was basically asking the question like, oh man, another loss at the Supreme Court for the Texas Attorney General, Ken Paxton. I wonder how this is going to affect him in the primary. And I was like, this is where we like to say, bless your heart. That's not going to have anything to do with whether he's successful in his primary or not. They just want to know he's fighting. They just want to know he's got another lawsuit queued up. No pun intended. But, this is all about their effort to overturn the election and change the election for 300 million Americans. And then, of course, this particular lawsuit was to deny millions and millions and millions of Americans the ability to have affordable health care as an option. So it's really amazing how these quote unquote Texas leaders spend so much of their time on things that aren't even in their purview or their jurisdiction. I mean, whether it's a federal issue like the border or, healthcare, I mean, or a federal election.
Well, Texas did not expand Medicaid with the Affordable Care Act, so we're currently just one of 12 states that hasn't done that, and we of course lead the nation in the number of uninsured. So this was, I mean, a very, very insidious play by Paxton to essentially try and get the country onto our bad level of healthcare coverage.
Yeah, and it's it's a loser all the way around. It's really bad for Texas taxpayers because even though we lost, which is a good thing, we still spent a lot of money fighting this fight. We still spent a lot of staff hours and the attorney general's office that could have been spent on other things that were more in line with the real needs of Texans. And so you have his office also participating in this new border wall scheme that the governor is talking about. So these are these are not things that Texans are concerned about. I would say one of the things that Texans are concerned about are having a grid that works and not having to, follow these conservation guidelines that say you have to, raise the temperature when you're sleeping to 82 degrees. And most Texans just are not going to do that. I'm sorry. It's just not going to happen. You know, they,
I would not be able, like, that would just, no, I
yeah,
can't do that.
sleeping when it's hot is hard. It is. I mean, and we are adjusting to a certain standard of living, and apparently Republicans can't maintain that standard of living in Texas. And I think that is the problem. We've seen this over and over again that Republicans are really just not, the Texas Republicans are not prepared for prime time. They don't have a lot of primary challenges up until now, and I think a lot of that is to do with Democratic performance and how Democrats are doing better in Texas. Now they all of a sudden are getting scared that the line of succession that they've created and behind closed doors is for grabs now and is in threat. And so now they've got a race to challenge each other to to finally move up the ladder a little bit before Democrats actually flip the state. And so, we saw what happened last time. A longtime governor of Texas tried to make a move to, national politics. Rick Perry got laughed off the stage. And so, that just shows you these guys, they may rule Texas government, but when you look at the performance in a national level, they suffer completely. They fail. And then if you look at the job they're doing here in Texas, it's pretty bad. They're not doing a good job at managing the government. And, our economy is strong. People, there's a lot of innovation and industries going on here in Texas, but our government is not one of them. And our government is not keeping up with the demand of residents and businesses. And I just don't know how long Texans are going to allow this incompetence to continue.
Mhm. Well, I mean, certainly the last time our grid failed, there were fatal consequences that happened, and again, that was a storm that was perfectly predicted. The meteorologists throughout our state, they said it's going to be this record-breaking freeze, so there was plenty of time to prepare for that. And in this case, Texas gets hot in the summertime. I don't. That's really, we don't really actually need a warning about that.
Yeah, it's kind
So
of our
this
thing.
is something. But yeah, that just kind of happens. So again, it's gonna, what the temperatures are gonna be. This isn't some out of left field thing.
Yeah, I mean, and so, sort of back to the question about Texas becoming a competitive state. I mean, the other thing we've seen, of course, this past session is the voter suppression attempts with SB 7 and the Democratic walkout. And to that, Democrats from the state house were actually in DC this week to meet with VP Kamala Harris and also Joe Manchin. And it turns out they actually did end up getting to meet with, I believe it was Joe Manchin's staff, chief of staff, and others they got to meet with. And they seem to have some productive conversations. I'm just glad that what's happening in Texas has finally risen to a national profile. It's incredibly important. And I hope that what they're doing there is applying enough pressure that we get the For the People Act passed. So I know that you spent some time talking to one of the state reps, Jasmine Crockett, who was there in DC. How did that go, and what did she have to say about their trip?
Sure. So she and Trey Martinez Fisher met with staff members for Joe Manchin's office. She was pretty on MSNBC. She was talking to a host about this, whether or not she was upset that she didn't actually get to meet with the senator himself. And she did point out that he was also at a separate voting rights meeting, so he wasn't just playing golf or jetting to Cancun, as some of our other Texas officials have done. And so she said that the staff did seem pretty receptive, especially I think they did not understand some of the, or did not fully comprehend what some of these provisions in SB 7 would do, particularly the ones that could ultimately change the outcome of an election. Not even so much if you have to prove voter fraud, just if you allege the fraud. So that was, I think, a really, for them, something that she thought was, they did actually, that did seem very concerning to them. But yeah, so I talked with Representative Crockett yesterday. Obviously, it's been a whirlwind trip. She was over at CNN studios. She met with Elizabeth Warren. She really enjoyed meeting with the senator. She also got to meet AOC. But this was, I mean, this was a huge, huge moment, I think, in a potential federal voting rights legislation. If we do ultimately get this, because people really paid attention to what happened in the Texas State House. And I'm kind of racking my brain to think the last time that happened, it was probably the Wendy Davis filibuster. But this was a time when a lot of the nation has, is starting to get to know a lot of our local officials, like Representative Crockett, and they are really making the case to someone like Joe Manchin, who, as of now, he, I think, now has sort of written out certain things he does support or doesn't support from the For the People Act. He wrote an op-ed saying he did not support the For the People Act as it exists now. So it's possible we'll get a new type of bill. However, there is still the pesky filibuster. And that is one thing that Representative Crockett did make it sound like he is really not budging on that.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, I saw that Stacey Abrams was on CNN talking about how she would support Joe Manchin's version of the For the People Act, even though it did include some provision about voter ID. And for me, like, this has been a long time issue, and I think a lot of Democrats would take issue with the way me saying this or whatever, but I think that we've got to reframe the voter ID issue, because when you poll people on all of these issues separately, they're on our side on all these issues, whether it's vote by mail, online voter registration. Like, you just go down the line, people want their vote to count and they want it to be convenient. But the one area where we lose big time is on voter ID, because it's not because it's any insidious reason either. It's just because naturally that it just sounds like a no-brainer to people. Well, of course we should know who's voting. That makes sense. You have to register to vote. We should make sure that those are the people who are voting. And we now, with technology, have ways of doing that we didn't before. Same day voter registration, obviously you have to prove who you are. You take a photo right then and there, and prove who you are. You sign an affidavit. I mean, it's a felony if you were to lie on that. I mean, there are huge consequences to it. So I think we have to reframe, and this is something essentially what Stacey Abrams said was one of the most insidious things that Republicans have been able to do, is convince people that Democrats somehow oppose proving who voters are or identifying voters, when we do it all the time. And we have a freaking voter file. Like, we constantly are identifying people, registering the vote, and trying to figure out ways to be more accurate in how we identify people. And so we really need to think about the way we say that, because Republicans want us to keep saying we oppose voter ID. We don't necessarily oppose voter ID like as a concept as much as we oppose their version of it, where they say you can vote with a gun ID, but you can't vote with a student ID. And they basically are very discriminatory in how they choose which IDs are valid. And things like that. And so, they oppose online voter registration, they oppose same day voter registration. So many things that we support that would increase civic engagement. And we aren't necessarily against voter ID, but as we understand it and what we know what their intention is, as labeled voter ID, we oppose that. But we've got to be smarter in how we talk about these things, because the average voter is not in tune to all this, and they know that, and they play off of that. And
Mhm.
so the guy on CNN who was interviewing Stacey Abrams was surprised, or it was almost like a gotcha, like, wait a minute, you would support this with voter ID? and she did a really great job, as always, of course, of explaining the position in a way that makes sense to people and is obvious. And so, but we've got to be smart about the words we use because they really do matter. And Republicans are really great at exploiting that and coming up with bumper sticker slogans that get people on board without much thought, and so the whole idea of common sense, is they exploit that concept while of course making any expert, the person that you shouldn't trust. Don't trust expert opinions, just trust your gut. Trust common sense would say this and that, and they're so good at it.
Hmm.
It's scary. So
Yeah.
um so the thing Abbott was signing, I don't know if this was today. I think it was, it certainly, he signed the permitless carry bill. um I mean, it's just amazing, so much you could say about this, but I saw the photo and it just looks like every other photo of a bunch of Republicans. In fact, I don't even think I saw a woman in that photo, and I know that there were women Republicans and legislators who voted for that bill, but I certainly didn't see any in that photo, and they don't seem to care about the optics of any of these things that they do, or they like the
No.
optics.
No, yeah. So permitless carry, to your point about sort of the bumper sticker slogans, this has been rebranded by Republicans as constitutional carry, even though the Second Amendment, was written during a time of militias and muskets. But we'll just let's forget that. So Abbott did sign it on Wednesday afternoon. There was a ceremonial signing Thursday at the Alamo, and it takes effect into September, in September 1st. So anyone over the age of 21 can basically carry a handgun without a permit. So I was actually at a rally earlier this morning for the Moms Demand Action chapter in Dallas. There were a lot of these demonstrations throughout the state, but it was very, these are the gun safety activists who have been, working on these issues all session, and this has been, I think, one of the worst sessions in recent memory. And we're still, it's still less than 2 years after what occurred in El Paso, and certainly Texas has also been the site of other mass shootings in Odessa, the Santa Fe High School. And I know we're gonna talk about what happened in Austin over the weekend. But it was it was very hard to talk with these activists. I mean, they're not daunted by this. They're going to keep fighting. But I talked with a volunteer. She's a recent mother. She has a 7-month old. She brought the 7-month old, so the tiniest activist. But her husband was a little worried for her to go. He said, what if there's some crazy person, and now they're so emboldened by this gun legislation? And she said, well, I'm just still going to fight for. I have to fight for our child, and I don't want my child to have to grow up in this environment. So that
Hmm.
was that was why she came. And there were stories all around that of people who have been impacted by gun violence, and now we have this terrible law on the books.
Yeah, and the thing is, like, all of these issues are connected. The fact that they signed this permitless carry legislation at the Alamo, the fact that they just signed some weird resolution that's called 1836 something history whatever, that's basically try to recharacterize and rewrite history as in some patriotic Texas viewpoint instead of just the facts about what happened historically, and the push against critical race theory, which he signed also today or this week. These things are all related, and what
Mhm.
we need to do as Democrats and progressives or whatever is connect these things together so that people can understand that all the way back when all the way back to the time when they basically had slave patrols is when they first started with this type of law enforcement in general, actually, and all the way through to Jim Crow laws, to separation of separate but equal through separating schools and everything. All these things are connected, And so we really need to do a good job of explaining it and how Republicans can get away with pushing this permitless carry legislation and calling themselves, back the blue and supporters of law enforcement when law enforcement opposes this. It
Mhm.
makes their job harder. And I saw a local newscaster sharing a video of recent released body cam footage of a Austin police officer in an police involved shooting where it was a domestic abuser. It was apparently like holding his own wife hostage after beating her. He had a gun, and you could hear the officer say, you could hear the woman screaming the entire time, and then the officer is like saying, "Hey, is anybody hurt? We're the police. We're here." And then he kind of goes in and looks in as soon as like his body cam footage. He looks around the corner, and all you see is fire, like boom, 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 and like fire shots at him, the police officer. And then he backs up, and you could hear the police officer saying, this guy is threatening to kill this woman if we go in, that we have a hostage situation. And so many times we hear about these abusers who are allowed to continue to own firearms and have access to firearms. And we know this story is not unique, where women feel for their lives and then their boyfriend, their husband or partner end up killing them with a gun, and it's preventable. And
It
these
is.
law
It was actually
yeah.
one of the speakers at our rally was from an organization called the Family Place, which is a domestic violence shelter. And so this was exactly to your point, where in states where similar laws have passed, domestic violence and fatalities will go up, and this is exactly what we know is going to happen. And also to your point about law enforcement, our police chief of police, Eddie Garcia, was one of several law enforcement officials who opposed this legislation, went down to Austin and said, "You are going to make our jobs harder."
Mhm. Yeah, and they know that, but they're so good on the messaging side, and we don't challenge them really on it. We just say, we just get appalled that they would say certain things or do certain things, but we don't challenge them on the messaging side. And they are so disciplined that they get away with it. So according to them, it's Democrats that are anti-law enforcement, Democrats who are trying to defund the police. And so you kind of mentioned the mass shooting that happened in Austin, which is a different type of mass shooting. The ones that happen in El Paso and Santa Fe, where people with the sole intent of mass destruction, of killing as many people in as short a time as they can. In the case with Austin, it was two people that were targeting each other, but they just had no, they were in a crowd of people, and they obviously didn't care about anybody else around them or who else they might hurt. 14 people end up getting injured. One actually died. And what happened was the local GOP is basically exploiting this event to get folks to sign a petition to increase police funding in Austin. And so they were basically trying to say, and they were actually just saying that this is the kind of thing that happens when you defund the police. And it's a lie. Just call it what it is, because the actual police chief in Austin said that his team was fully staffed that night on 6th Street. And anybody who lives in Austin knows that 6th Street is closed down from Thursday night, Friday night, and Saturday night, barricaded, police everywhere, on every corner, on foot, on bike, on horseback, in patrol cars. They're everywhere. And this happened anyway. So police are there, and thank goodness they were there. They're there to respond to crime. They're not preventing the crime from happening. They're responding in the best way they can. So what if you think about public safety holistically, you have to include prevention. And what are we doing to prevent these crimes? What are we doing to prevent these types of people from having guns? And it turns out this guy who was a juvenile too, no less, he was involved in some other incident in Killeen where he's from. So we already can identify who these people are, but we can't do anything about the fact that they have access to guns. Of course we can. We choose not to. And so this is something that, again, on the messaging side, like, we have the moral high ground. We have the facts and the data, which doesn't always matter. We just
Mhm.
have to do better at the narrative in the communication. I think.
And you're right. We also have the polling on our side. About 81% of Texans actually just support the current permitting system that we do have. Permitless carry is not popular, exactly to the points that we were making. It is just making that argument to the public that what exactly this legislation is.
Hmm. And so, oh man, it's just so much, you know. But just the fact that they signed that permitless carry at the Alamo is just amazing to me when you think about the critical race theory bill that he also signed, because the
Which,
whole
by the way, can we also just say that critical race, there is not an elementary school student or a high
right.
school student in Texas that is learning critical race theory. This is ludicrous.
Yeah, it's a lie.
Um,
Again, it's just a lie, and I'm guilty of doing, what I just said we shouldn't do, which is take them on their word. Yes, it's BS. The whole thing is BS. There is no critical race theory that's being taught to elementary school kids.
but any, I guess, so any, for any argument or anything that is sort of related to racism, discrimination, uh, xenophobia, these are the exact type of things that they've all sort of labeled. It's like critical race theory has become the bogeyman.
Yeah.
Or like if anyone has sort of read about like the satanic panic that occurred in the 80s, it's
Mhm.
like very similar to this, where they've just like
It's a
all this
catch-all
stuff that's,
term.
yeah, it's a
Yeah.
catch-all term, and it's they have been very successful at getting that making this a whole catchphrase. I
Mhm.
had I had a conversation with a friend of mine. He's a contractor. I get the impression I'm the person he goes to talk to about politics. He's pretty liberal. I don't know if he has that around his family or his inner circle. And he was telling me, he was like, Jessica, every single person I know is obsessed with critical race theory. And he was like, it's completely penetrated. And they now assume like nursery school kids are being taught uh, Derek Bell or Kimberly, this stuff that's just, it is not happening. But
Yeah, it's the
this is the
disinformation is
environment they've created.
yeah, the disinformation is very strong and it's effective, and that's the saddest part. It's so effective. They're so good at it,
Mhm.
at distracting from the real issues. And so there's a book that was just released called Forget the Alamo, which hopefully we'll have Jason Stanford, one of the authors, on sometime soon. But he's a longtime sort of democratic strategist, and he and a couple other authors wrote this book, which is basically a history of the Alamo and sort of debunking sort of the myth and the mythical nature of the Alamo and what happened there. And basically the Texans were fighting against Mexico because Mexico had banned slavery and they wanted to keep it. And so, but people like Greg Abbott and these other folks who obsess over this iconography of the Alamo don't like that story being told because it kind of messes with their ability to just, and this is why I say it's all connected. That's why they're at the Alamo, because they want to change what really happened. They don't, if you knew what happened at the Alamo and you saw what they're doing today, you could draw a through line from what happened then to Jim Crow to separation of separate but equal to voter suppression today, and where they're targeting people in Harris County and how they're targeting certain types of IDs you can use to vote. It is all connected. It is a pretty straight line. And the way they can break that line up is our education system and trying to prevent people from learning our history and learning about what actually took place, what the real reasons people were doing things, and even using their own words. The folks that were there telling you why they were there, they will still deny it, and they say this is just liberal propaganda, this is critical race theory. And you saw just today the US Congress had a vote to make Juneteenth a holiday, and 14 Republicans voted against it. And for
Yeah,
folks who
two
don't,
Texans.
two Texans, Chip Roy and Ronnie Jackson, who Ronnie Jackson was, of course, Trump's doctor, and they voted against Juneteenth. And one of them, at least one of them, cited critical race theory as a reason to vote against Juneteenth. And for folks who don't know what Juneteenth is, it's actually a very Texas centric holiday. It happened 3 years after the Civil War. It took 3 years for Texas former slaves to even realize that they were former slaves, to realize that the Emancipation Proclamation happened and that they were now free. It took 3 years. And that celebration of Juneteenth is to celebrate the fact that these people now knew about their freedom and could act on their freedom. And they don't want that to be a holiday. Why? Because we learn about holidays. We learn why things are important on those days and why it rises to a national, occasion that we celebrate. They voted.
People have pointed out that now. So I should also say that there, a Fort Worth native, Opal Lee, was one of the staunchest supporters of Juneteenth. She was at the White House ceremony. We've covered her quite a bit at Texas Signal in her campaign to make Juneteenth a national holiday. But a lot of people have pointed out that now it is a federal holiday, but with the Texas HB 3979. I refer to it as the school censorship bill. Can you even say what Juneteenth represents? It's not clear that you can actually do that.
Isn't it so funny? These are the most thin-skinned snowflakes ever, and that's what they project on the Democrats. But you can't even tell historical fact without them getting queasy or thinking that they're somehow being discriminated against.
You talk about thin-skinned, but the representative who ushered in HB 3979, Steve Toth, he literally cited this little picture book as one of the reasons that critical race theory was being taught. It's actually now kind of disputed whether or not this was on a librarian's book or something in Highland Park, Dallas. But I will say, so this book is called Not My Idea, a book about whiteness. It is just a little picture book. And I read it, unlike Senator Brian Hughes, who did not. This is not critical race theory. Stuff like this is not critical race theory. I think any child who reads this, they will probably be just fine.
Yeah.
But this is how thin-skinned they are. They cannot deal with anything.
No, I mean, and if they could deal with anything, it'd be great to just deal with the important things that are happening in our state right now. I mean, we're struggling, like I said, to keep the lights on. And the thing that the governor is focused on is now the building a border wall, which is not the purview of state government. But he has found, and get this, $250 million from who? Texas Department of Criminal Justice, which is a law enforcement agency of the state.
Talk about defunding the police.
I mean, absolutely. They are defunding the state police to to literally build a wall. It's so incredibly absurd. And that $250 million, by the way, is just a down payment. So they're going to accept donations, like a GoFundMe. They're going to try to build. Now, I think, if my memory serves me correct, that we've tried that once already.
Yes. So we actually covered this at Texas Signal. So if folks remember Steve Bannon, this was the enterprise where he got arrested from. He and another conservative activist, initially they were on GoFundMe with this, and then GoFundMe kind of kicked them off. So they started a We Build the Wall kind of nonprofit. They had a summit in New Mexico. It was attended by like Louis Gohmert, Donald Trump Jr., a number of things. But yes, so they defrauded millions of dollars from folks. I believe Bannon was actually arrested on a boat of some kind. So Bannon was pardoned for this. However, he could still face charges if we ever did have a competent attorney general who would, maybe want to look into the fraud that occurred and bilking a lot of donors.
Would that be a state attorney general or the U.S. attorney general?
That's a great question. My dad.
I guess it would have to be the state, because
I think it's a state. Yeah.
Yeah, because if he was already pardoned for federal crimes.
So it would be a state attorney, and there are other states that could still take that up. But yes, so the last time we did try to fund the border wall, it didn't go very well.
Yeah, and so obviously this is a distraction. They got Trump going down there on the 30th of this month. So Trump will be back in Texas with Greg Abbott on the border, looking at this wall or whatever they're going to try to build. And so it'll be interesting to see how that all shakes out.
Frankly, and this was something that was brought up at the rally I attended against permitless carry. I spoke with a reverend from an Episcopal church, and he said that this is just Abbott catering to a base. There's this nothing more, nothing less. And I think there's so many actions that he's taken, including the border wall, where this is what's happening. This is actually one area where he has an advantage over Ron DeSantis out of Florida. Uh, there's no border with Mexico in Florida. Although
Yeah.
they should probably build a wall. I know the rising sea levels of Miami, but
Yeah, I mean, if he wants to build a wall for Texas, it should be in the Gulf of Mexico, and it's called the Ike Dike. And there's been a lot of talk about it for years, and we're in hurricanes coming up on hurricane season, so that's the only wall we should be talking about building, because that's the one that's actually going to do some good. And but yeah, no, of course, that's not what we're talking about. And it's absolutely, this is a base issue they're going after the base, just once again exposing that their audience is small. Their audience is small. They know it. That's why they're trying to reduce the electorate as small as they possibly can. And again, all these things are connected. This is just all part of the plan. And so Don Huffines is running against Greg Abbott. And basically what's been happening is Don Huffines will float out some really kind of crazy idea. The grassroots loves it, and Greg Abbott will pick whichever one seems to be, building, excitement amongst the grassroots. And so this funding the border wall sort of privately issue is one of those things. And apparently there was another one too. Recently, I was listening to another podcast, and they brought up some of Don Huffines' ideas and which ones that Greg Abbott seems to be sort of cherry picking. But yeah, but that's the whole point. He's trying to make it through a primary, because he feels like if he makes it to the primary, then he's going to be just fine through the general election. And so, we've got a lot of work to do to change that.
yeah, yeah. So yes, we will. I think we've got two visits in store for Donald Trump. He'll also be at the CPAC conference in Dallas.
Oh, that's in
Early
Dallas. Wow. So, back to this. So, Abbott is going to call a special session. The rumor right now is that it's going to be in July, sometime after July 4th. He's going to call it, and he's basically said he's going to put a few different things on it. We don't know what order. We don't know if they're all going to be on this same special, but for sure, we're expecting a voter suppression bill. We're expecting another critical race theory bill, because apparently the one he signed wasn't strong enough. And so, and then there's potentially Article 10 funding, which I think this is a big deal. So Article 10 funds the legislature, but it also funds other agencies adjacent to the legislature, the legislative budgeting board, and the attorneys that sort of write legislation on behalf of legislators who are proposing bills and things like that. All of the staff that work in the legislative branch of government, all funded in Article 10. Greg Abbott has until this Sunday, the 20th, to veto that legislation. And if he does, then starting September 1st, we'll have a completely defunded legislative branch of government. Whether they come back and work for free, or they get an unemployment, or whatever, we shall see. But it's thought that he might actually put that up on the July call as well. He vetoes Article 10 funding, and then he puts it back on the call so that legislators can refund Article 10, basically saying, I'm going to defund you, do what I want, and then you can get your funding back. So it seems a lot like bribery. It seems a lot like it's unconstitutional, and definitely a separation of powers issue. But these guys don't really seem to care. It's all about the look and sort of like, these power plays and stuff. So these are sort of the rumors that are coming out right now amongst legislative staff, is that they think that these are the bills that are going to be put on a potentially a July special session.
It just goes to show you how morally bankrupt Greg Abbott is. This is
Absolutely. He's gotten worse over the years. He's absolutely gotten worse. And he's angry. He's not even smooth, like at least Perry was a little smoother. Abbott just doesn't even seem to have a personality, you know? Um, and so, yeah, I mean, yeah, these aren't priorities. These aren't priorities. We're going to call a special session for things that are not priorities. And
The
meanwhile,
I mean, this critical race theory, like you got the school censorship bill you wanted. I'm failing to see what else do you need to do. This is,
well, I mean, these folks, these base folks
I
are
know, they just,
insatiable. And so I saw Michael Quinn Sullivan, who sort of represents the hardcore right, and their sort of agenda. You can always kind of, you know, he always has his finger up in the wind. And essentially, he was saying he was glad to see Abbott say that because the bill they passed was so watered down that it was basically ineffective. So I would say that he takes issue with you that they passed the bill that they wanted. So we will see what that actually looks like and how far they intend to go. But yeah, it's pretty awful stuff.
no, this has been a very, and this is something that I think every person I talk with, they feel very exhausted. It was a challenging legislative session. We've still got a special session to go. Um, but this is kind of when you roll up your sleeves. I was talking with Representative Crockett. A lot of those representatives who went up to DC, that's on their own dime. Nobody is actually paying them to do this. They are our advocates. They are trying to go to the people who could pass something like a federal voting rights legislation. And this is also, at the end of the day, why elections matter.
Hmm.
If we had a possible Democratic majority this session, uh, which was always a tall order for 2020, but I think possibly what was in the realm of possibility, things might have been a little different. Instead, even though, again, this state has been trending blue, we got one of the worst sessions ever, with some real big consequences. I will say, my best friend, she's a doctor. She's currently in Minnesota. She is up for a position at a Texas hospital, but she and her husband are a little wary of coming to Texas, even though I would love it if she were here. And I think those conversations are happening all across the country. People are looking to see what Texas has done, and this is something I think a lot of people say, like, hey, we might want to move here, but I don't know about this. This is crazy.
I mean, there's no question about it that what the Republicans are doing is absolutely hurting our economy, and they love to tout how Texas is popular destination for people to relocate because of jobs and quality of life and things like that. But then everything they do is to ruin that. And whether it's at the statewide level with these bills or it's at the local level, like we mentioned with Austin, and they're pushing these petitions. And I just got a letter asking me to sign this petition, and the language in it, they just make it sound like this is a murderous hellscape that we live in Austin, Texas, the number one fastest growing city in America that tops. I mean, I used to work for the mayor of Austin, not the current one, with the one before. And man, our whole election was, look at this list we're on. Number one, place to relocate for retirees, best place to locate for young people, best place to start a business for women. Like, all of these things, we top all these lists, and if you look at what the Republicans have to say about it, it is like a third world country or something. You would think it's not safe to go outside here. That's not encouraging people to
You
want to
know,
move
you
here.
weren't like acting out like a Jean-Claude Van Damme movie, having to
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I love that reference too. Is like my favorite. But
Oh, me too. That's what my grandma and I used to love watching all the time.
yes, awesome. So absolutely right. I mean, it's mind blowing. So yeah, I mean, and then when that fails, they just turn the lights out. So they're like, okay, people are still moving here. It's unbelievable. So we've got a lot to do to bring our government to the par that our workers are and our businesses are, and it's just not there. So a long way to go. And to your point, yes, the sessions have gotten worse because they fear for their own future. And so things are getting harder, things are getting more extreme. They're playing more to their base because that is the ultimate I mean, that's really the only way this story can play out. They can't go more moderate, and so they've got to focus on a smaller and smaller niche of people and continue these disinformation campaigns in order to keep the power that they have, and it's pretty scary. So hopefully, we'll see some benefit from that trip to DC, and we'll see hopefully some legislation passed that benefits voters across the whole country, but the 30 million people who are here in Texas. Um, yeah, that's
Yeah, I wish I had a more hopeful note.
I
I'm really,
I know it's like struggling for
I know.
pull some straws that might be good news, but I think the real good news is just that this word is getting out, and that this is a national story, and
Mhm.
that there will be millions and millions of dollars from outside coming into Texas to help correct some of these things,
Yeah.
and to you know expand on the efforts that are happening at the organizer level and at the grassroots level. But then, uh to your other point about raising profiles, the folks like Jasmine Crockett's who go to DC, that helps raise their profile.
Mhm.
And ultimately, that's what happens. Like, when bad things happen, you get to see who steps up, and these folks are going to make names for themselves. And I don't think that's why they're doing it, really, but that's what's going to happen. They go on MSNBC, they go on CNN, they tell their stories. People will hear about what they're doing, find out who they are. And again, that's one of the whole reasons we started the Signal at all, was to give that type of platform to people. And so it's really great that you are able to build that relationship with her, so that she can go to DC, talk to the vice president, and the next day you're talking to her and she's talking to us here at the Signal, and we can, like, amplify that message, get people involved here at the local level, so that we can be ready in 2022 for.
We have some good people that are fighting for us in Texas. We just got to get them some more Jean Claude Van Dams that will be able to fully take on the Republicans.
Yeah, absolutely. What was the one movie he was in, Double Impact?
Oh yeah, that's a
Where
good
there were
one.
two of them. Yeah, so
Yeah.
yeah, we just need to do.
Not to be mistaken with, I think it's Double Take, the one with Dennis Rodman. That's a bad one. So the Double Impact is the good one.
Yeah, or Face Off with that was John Travolta.
Oh,
But
Nicholas Cage. Oh yeah,
yeah, yeah,
that's
so
another good one.
yeah, so yeah, so absolutely, yeah, we've got to duplicate these types of folks who are doing the good work, and make sure we amplify their efforts. And so that is the good news, is that Republicans, as hard as they're trying, they're actually making rock stars out of some of our folks who are trying the hardest. And that when and they're testing them, and they're getting tested out in the real battlefield of politics. And in the next couple of years, they're going to be formidable, and they're going to have names, and they're going to be able to raise money, and they're going to be on the ballot. And that's going
Mhm,
to be it's going to be the challenge that they're not prepared for. So
mhm.
all we can do is play our part in that, and keep doing what we're
Yeah.
doing. And so I appreciate you and all the work that you do to make that happen, and keep having
I
these
did, yeah,
conversations.
I did just remember it's Double Team. That's the one with Dennis Rodman. You should not see that. But it's,
That's hilarious.
but oh yeah, go through the whole. It's summertime. You should enjoy some movies.
Yeah, yeah. Just don't do it while washing clothes or in the middle of the day with the lights on, because you know it might be lights, camera,
Lights
no,
out.
no
Yeah.
action. Yeah, lights out. So all right, well, I think it's probably time for lights out for us too here this week, but we did find a way to make a positive end on a positive note, which is awesome. So just keep that good work up, and I'm sure we'll hear more. You'll probably publish a story about what you heard in that conversation you had with her, right?
Mhm.
At texassignal.com. So keep up with us there. Also find us on social media, on Twitter at Texas Signal, on Instagram, on TikTok, wherever you get your podcasts, you can find us. And you can also become a Patreon member and help support the good progressive journalism we do here by going to texassignal.com. In the top right corner, you'll see join Patreon. We really appreciate that. And until next time, later, y'all.
Bye, guys.